The Treatise of Wisdom, Part 1, The Scroll of Knowledge, by Edward Styler. Prologue, titled Glimpse. The world lay before her like a stage, governments and people like characters in a play. For the actors reading their scripts for the first time, their future was always uncertain. For her, the future was always known, for she was its author. This would be her greatest work yet, and it would be seen throughout the world. In the coming years she would use a power so vast and omnipotent that she would break the walls of every nation. She would harness the lords above and the laborers below, and shape the will of every soul between. She would perform the perfect war. A mosquito landed on the palm of her hand. She looked at it for a moment, then gently blew it away. Chapter 1. The night promised to bring an autumn chill, and the first notions of that were causing great wisps of mist to roll up from the warm sea. The fading sun imparted to the mist its last rays, illuminating the slow-moving mass with a purple incandescence. From their watch at Gate Tower, Moss and his young brother could see the mist slowly billowing around the lower skirts of Mid-Tower and the main fortress. Good events always follow a night's rise such as this, little brother. A tower's eye not only observes the road ahead and the sea behind, but also listens to the whisperings of the world. Moss's youngest brother was just beginning his apprenticeship as a tower's eye, a position held by his family for over 800 years. "I don't hear anything but birds and people," he said, grumpily leaning on the stone wall while peering between two merlins. The road lay like a tongue from the mouth of the great gate. It stretched out into the deepening darkness as it wound along the narrow peak of the peninsula which jutted out into the fjord's water and connected the fortress to the mainland. "Keep your spirits up, little brother. You can't play your whole life, and to be a tower's eye is a great honor. Now if you want to hear the whisperings of the world, you can't just use your ears. You need to remember everything you have ever witnessed and everything that has ever been taught to you. You need to be able to relate your memories to what is going on around you. Then you will be able to anticipate things before they happen. You will learn in time." Moss stared knowingly at the thin crescent moon which was slowly following the sun below the sea. A smile came to his lips. "Keep a sharp eye, lad," he said. It was indeed an auspicious night. The air was cool but soft. Moss recalled a dream he once had. He was being chased by something, though he couldn't recall by what. The chase led through a fair-sized village shrouded in darkness. He had not felt any real fear, he simply knew that he had to get away. He ran through the yards between the houses until he was running through open ground. A lake materialized before him, a perfectly calm pool of water, as black as the night it reflected. He ran into the lake and was immediately swimming peacefully. 3 seals with huge liquid eyes swam with him, and somehow those huge shining black eyes told him he was safe, that he would always be safe. It was the water that allowed the dream to become a vivid memory. It was cold, yet he felt no chill, just a soft coolness that permeated his flesh and soul, as if healing and cleansing him with living liquid. The Council of Fjord Harbor's Eye was in session. The 7 chancellors were seated on high-backed chairs around an elaborately carved and inlaid round table. The council chamber was one of the most beautiful rooms in Fjord Harbor's Eye. The beauty was in the contrast between simplicity and intricacy. The room itself was enclosed in a round ring of stone arches, the centers of which were hung with the finest glass. Indeed, except for the stone of the arches, the entire room was glass, from floor to ceiling. The room was high on the fortress walls, making an atrium of the court directly below. People could be seen going about their business far under their feet. Around them, the tall towers loomed in the dark of the night, and above, through the glass of the domed roof, The stars were bright, twinkling points. Aside from the great table, chairs, and occupants, the room was bare. One almost felt as though they were floating through the air when in that room. As Council Director and Chancellor of Local Relations, Firehand had the task of directing the conversations of the Council so everyone had a fair opportunity to speak. Then we are agreed. We will build and man 2 more fishing vessels until 10 more sections of land to augment our annual food supply. As such, we can reduce the hunting of wild game, which has become overconsumptive with our growing population. Chancellors, aye or nay? Aye, 7 people in the room said in unison. Very good then, Firehand said, and took a moment to write in the council ledger. The next order of discussion will be of Fasthand's recent council with the 8 other Chancellors of Defense. Fasthand, if you please. Thank you, Director, Fasthand said, as he stood from his chair. That was his custom for addressing the council. He was not a man who was accustomed to sitting for lengthy periods. His hard face was always emotionless, but if one was able to hold his gaze for a moment, they could see the eyes of a dragon guarding his kingdom. As you know, the 9 of us met in Peak's Eye for the 10-year defense review. Aside from the standard issues discussed, which I will get into later, one topic in particular deeply disturbed me. Farsight, the Chancellor of Defense for Peak's Eye, brought forth the idea that the 40 years of peace which has blessed our land could eventually be our downfall. What? How's that? Exclaimed Lifetouch, Chancellor of Social Welfare. Please, said Firehand. Let him not be interrupted. The armies of Highland are great in number, and thanks to Firehand's wizardry, our weapons are unrivaled. However, continued Fasthand, all the troops are green. The last man to have actually had any experience in battle retired from service this year. The rest of the army is indeed skilled and well trained, but as we know, war is the real teacher. These men don't know how to deal with real fear, with the real idea of kill or be killed. They don't know how to deal with rapidly changing battle situations. The list goes on. 700 years ago, the barbarian tribes of the unclaimed lands united and attacked the civilized lands bordering them. These people had rudimentary arms and no siege weapons, yet they were able to bring down 4 great cities before they were driven back. They were able to achieve such destruction because they had been involved in unceasing tribal warfare for millennia. And the more civilized of us were content to sit back and watch them kill each other, while we got soft and sedated behind our thick walls. Our comfort cost us 90,000 lives and countless relics of our culture. This is not a scenario that we can afford to have repeated. Fasthand paused to have a drink from the cup in front of him. The other chancellors sat quiet and motionless, eyes fixed. He went on. Farsight estimated that in order for our armies to be properly trained, each man should be involved in a small skirmish every 3 years, and a major battle or siege should be held every 10 years. What? Burst Lifetouch. You mean to say that the prosperity of peace should be cast aside for the readiness of armies that we would rather not need? Silence, silence, motioned Firehand. I know the idea would seem to break logic, but the actions of rogue nations are rarely logical, and to counter them, our logic must look beyond our immediate situation. 40 years of peace is but a grain of sand in the millennia which shapes nations. It would be naive of us to simply hope that what we have now will last, when history proves otherwise. It was discussed at the defense review that our training could take place on 2 fronts. First, skirmishes and large battles would be held in the unclaimed lands. In addition to the training, such action could provide us with new lands rich in lumber and minerals. It would also keep the barbarians in check. Second, large battles and major sieges could take place on Cavrock. Our relationship with them is tolerant at best. Further, being an island nation, they will reach a point where they haven't got enough land to sustain their growing population, and they will be forced to seek more. The best defense for that inevitable situation is to strike first, so the war is fought on their ground. Both these conflicts would be conducted slowly, over centuries, so that our resources are not overburdened, and in order to sustain a continuous training program. The spoils of our efforts would, at the very least, counter the cost. The other Chancellors of Defense will be bringing this topic up for discussion in their respective councils, after which we feel a Grand Council should be held, since war efforts involve all sectors of the nation. I now open this topic to the Council at large. Fasthand sat down, and everyone but he and Firehand began talking at once. "Order, order," said Firehand, while motioning with his hands for everyone to calm down. "This is a serious matter and needs to be discussed thoroughly. I will begin by saying that we must be objective on this. Certainly war is not a welcome scenario, but, as Fasthand has articulated, neither are the possible results of taking our peace for granted. We will speak in turn. Lifetouch, you may begin." "Well, I dare say this is the most reckless idea I have ever heard in council. To break peace for the benefit of bettering our armed forces is an injustice to life as a whole. Our own people will suffer, not just those in the opposing nations. Wars cost lives, and your opponents will not be the only ones who suffer casualties. We finally have a generation of people who don't know war, who don't hold overbearing animosity towards other nations, who train their minds and not their fists. This phenomenon will surely be mirrored in the cultures of other nations and can only grow as people become less ignorant and more tolerant. Let us allow the memories of toil and hate be forgotten to time." Lifetouch nodded to Firehand to indicate he was finished talking. "Sweetword, as Chancellor of World Relations, what can you say on this point of view?" inquired Firehand. "I am inclined to agree with Lifetouch," began Sweetword. "The people of the unclaimed lands have been content to keep to themselves for the past 700 years, and the very war that they united in has seemed to have stabilized their tribal relations, such that no major conflicts have arisen between them that we know of. Furthermore, the growing tolerance Lifetouch spoke of is a global phenomenon. Even in Cavrock, the younger generation is growing tired of their elders' prejudice towards other peoples, particularly when those peoples do not display the vileness portrayed in the elders' revels. If we begin an unjust war, we will betray the peaceful attitude of the new generations, and will turn it into the seat of bitter revenge. If, however, we maintain peace through the tools of diplomacy, old hatreds will die off, and I foresee a future where we will not act as rivaling nations, but as neighboring communities. We also have to consider how the rest of the nations, who are friendly toward us now, would view us if we became marauding warmongers." "If I may speak on that, Director," said Feather, Chancellor of Trade. "You may," said Firehand. "I don't believe we would lose much esteem in the community at large if we began a slow invasion of Cavrock. In fact, I think it may even be welcome. That island takes great pride in being at the mouth of the Narrows of Deepwater, a pride fueled by the fact that no trading ship can pass through the Narrows without paying a stiff toll. This arrogance has long been a bitter taste in the mouths of all trading nations, and being rid of it would be a welcome sweetness. Our wealth would grow not only from having new lands, but also from having cheap trade." "If I may speak," said Softfoot, Chancellor of Local Security. Firehand nodded to him. "Thank you. A toll for safe passage is not just cause for warfare. The toll has always been there, and our finances have never suffered because of it. However, we are steering away from the main issue of national defense. In the art of Jai Khan, there is only one method of defense which is unbeatable, and that is to avoid conflict altogether. Be just and true to your convictions, and you will gain respect even from your greatest enemy. Be arrogant and bullying to lesser opponents, and all will wish to see you fall. I agree that diplomacy is the best method to avoid any conflict. We have, as our best weapon, foresight. Foresight and the knowledge and time to use it. Having open war against two strong opponents is madness. Should you conquer new territory, you will have to defend it in addition to Highland, and defend it against people resolved to get their home back. Our allies would begin to mistrust us if we strike out for vague reasons. They may think we wish to conquer all kingdoms. War used as a last line of defense when all other options have failed is justified. All other situations of war are nothing but folly or greed. You, Fasthand, talk of observing history, but you neglect something more substantial than being caught off guard. That is, every civilization that walked the path of conqueror fell into utter destruction. Peace, held by the edge of a sword, walks on the edge of a sword. Softfoot returned to his seat. "Ho! Here comes someone up the road," exclaimed Moss's brother. "I don't recognize them, though. Someone walking with a stick." Moss saw a distant figure materialize from the darkness. His young brother had sharp eyes, as did all his family. If he developed a sharp mind as well, he would become a great Tower's Eye. "That's a staff, not a stick, little brother. Memorize its shape, for its bearer is a very special person who never appears to look the same from one moment to the next, nor does she appear to look the same to one person or another. She only comes this way every few years, and you can be sure that there will be a grand feast tomorrow for her welcome." Moss then abruptly twirled around on his heel and snapped perfectly to attention facing Mid-Tower and the main fortress of Fjord Harbor's Eye. He called out in a loud, clear voice, "Rain, Lady of the World, approaches from Fjord's Head." Immediately, the general murmur of the population could be heard to grow loud and excited. A page burst into the council chambers, interrupting the heated discussion. "What's this?" boomed Firehand, louder than was necessary for a bit of rudeness, but he had been getting quite agitated by the meeting. The page, who was out of breath after running up several flights of stairs, panted out, "Rain, sir. Lady of the World is approaching on Fjord's Head." Firehand's mood suddenly brightened. "Rain? Why, she hasn't been here in years. Thank you, boy. Please notify the lantern bearers that I will be at the gates presently." Yes, sir." The page turned and ran back the way he had come. Firehand addressed the council. "We have discussed many points of view on this matter. I think it is best that further talk be with all the chancellors of Highland in a grand council. Please think on this deeply until then, so that we may voice all points of view and all options. This council is closed." He left the room, and the rest of the chancellors erupted into argument behind him. The great doors of Gate Tower and Mid Tower were drawn open, and the massive gate of Fjord Harbor's Eye slowly rose to the sounds of clinking chains and groaning cogs. A troop of tower guards carrying glass lanterns marched out in perfect beat and ceremoniously flanked the long wire-span bridges which connected the fortress to Midgate and Midgate to Gate Tower. Firehand emerged and proceeded between the two rows of lantern bearers at an easy walk. "Stand tall now, little brother. Look proud and respectful. You represent all of Fjord Harbor's Eye, and a great person shall be passing beneath us." Moss stood straight and motionless at his post, with his eyes ever following the solitary traveler down the road of Fjord's Head. ever alert for any sign of danger on the dark slopes which fell away to either side. Firehand walked across the glowing bridges with a glad heart. He always felt privileged to converse with Rain. She was, without a doubt, the most talented wielder of natural magic that he knew of, and he was ever thirsty for her vast knowledge. Firehand stopped to wait when he was just outside the entry to Gate Tower. He could not yet see Rain through the darkness, and he smiled and shook his head at the uncanny ability of the tower's eyes. He heard the soft footsteps and the tap of a staff on cobblestones before he saw the visitor. Before long she stepped out of the veiling dark and into the gold light of the lanterns. Firehand stepped forward with a smile and extended his arms in greeting. "Welcome, Rain, Lady of the World. Your illuminating presence is forever welcome here at Fjordharbor's Eye." A hand emerged gracefully from Rain's brown travel cloak and accepted Firehand's courteous gesture. Her hand in his, she replied, "Thank you, Firehand. Fjordharbor's Eye and all its people are always a welcome sight." Firehand turned, and the two of them walked back across the bridges together. The heavy doors of Gate Tower were drawn closed behind them with a deep groan, and thudded dully as the bars were replaced. "What brings us the honor of your company this eve?" Firehand asked. "I wish to address the council on matters of great importance," Rain replied in a grave tone. "Oh? Is something serious happening in the world that we are unaware of?" Firehand's smile faded somewhat. "I will speak of these matters when the full council is gathered. In the meantime, I hope you and I can find some time to have a private talk in your library." She caught his eye and smiled. "Yes, of course, my lady. As much time as you desire." Firehand's smile returned. Private talk, of course, meant they would be discussing magic and things of that nature. They continued over the second bridge in silence, the doors of Mid-Tower closing behind them. Through the corner of his eye, Firehand could see Rain's face in the soft yellow light. She never appeared to age, but it seemed to him that each time he saw her, she looked wiser and more mysterious. Progress through the grounds to Firehand's quarters was slow, as the entire population seemed to be out to greet Rain. "Welcome, lady. We are most honored. Won't you come by for tea tomorrow? I have a problem with my hip. Can you—" Rain was polite and idled here and there to say hello and set appointments with people who had more pressing medical conditions. Firehand's quarters were in a tall corner turret on the ocean side of the fortress. The distinguishing feature of Firehand's turret was its great golden spherical top. This was the housing and gear complex for a very large telescope. It was many times larger than the telescope used at the top of the tower's eye, which was primarily for spotting distant ships, and had in the past been used for following and directing battles. In contrast, the telescope in the golden sphere pointed towards the heavens. When they finally arrived at the door at the base of the tower, Firehand addressed the gathered crowd. "Tomorrow, the Lady Rain will be resting. You will see her at the welcoming feast to be held tomorrow at sundown, and she can speak to you then as to when and if she can hold a time for some of you to make inquiries." With that, he ushered Rain inside and shut the door to the mob. "For all the education we give them, they still behave like sheep in a flock," Firehand said apologetically. "It makes the council's task of managing them easier, though, does it not?" Rain replied with a glint in her eye. "Always challenging the points of view, chuckled Firehand. "A wise person should have no point of view," she said. "But of course, you must be weary after your travels. You may stay in my guest quarters as usual." Firehand led Rain through a passage to a round room in the center of the turret. Its ceiling stretched up to the very top of the turret, and an iron spiral staircase in the very center of the room coiled its way up to the floors above. The room smelled sweet, with many perfumes of a multitude of plants and flowers and small trees which lived in great pots set into the floor, or which hung on walls and from the catwalks connecting to the staircase at each floor. If it were day, the room would be ablaze with rich sunlight focused with great mirrors, but in the evening it had a cool blue luminescence. 6 great hollow glass pillars rose straight up from the floor to the ceiling, 6 floors above them. Within some of them swam graceful jellyfish. In another were varieties of demonic-looking fish. In another were snails and flying insects and fungi. It was an exhibition of some of the most exotic species to be found, as all of them glowed blue or purple or green with some miraculous feat of nature. Firehand climbed the winding staircase to the 3rd floor and led Rain over the catwalk to a door of richly carved wood. He opened the door for her and said, "You will find everything you need. I will have a meal and a hot basin brought up. Have a pleasant night." She smiled and thanked him and closed the door softly behind her.